Hello, friends. Thanks for sticking with me until the end of day 2 here. So my name is Natalie. I lead the Texas Bitcoin Foundation. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm also an anthropologist. And one of the reasons Bitcoin has been so interesting to me from the very beginning is because it's kind of a real life and real time social experiment about what money is and what value is. So today, I just want to take a few minutes to give you guys an overview of some of the research that I've been working on that will be published next year as part of the Satoshi Papers. So what is the Satoshi Papers? This is a book, a compilation of essays that the Texas Bitcoin Foundation is putting out. We have a number of contributors from different disciplines, philosophers, social scientists, economists, writing about Bitcoin from various perspectives. So, we're really interested in the social dimensions of Bitcoin. There are a lot of organizations out there that focus on the technical aspects of Bitcoin or that do political lobbying. And I really perceived a gap in the space. I felt that there was a need to kind of take the 30,000-foot view and do some work that would help explain, to policymakers, to economists, to academics, what Bitcoin is and why it matters. I also want to just quickly shout out my friends at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. They are supporting the Satoshi Papers, and they've been longtime supporters of me and my work. So just wanted to give them a quick thank you there. These are some of the contributors we have who will be included in the volume next year. So we have Tuur Demeester, who is also on the board of the Texas Bitcoin Foundation, Professor Sarah Kreps, political scientist at Cornell University, Andrew Bailey and Craig Warmke, philosophers and social scientists, myself, Jack Watt. He's a Bitcoin entrepreneur out of the UK, physicist and pilot. Aaron Daniel, who is a lawyer, legal scholar, and Leopoldo Bebchuk, who is an anthropologist out of Buenos Aires. So we have a really diverse set of contributors, and I hope you'll stay tuned for the publication. So, okay, so let's talk about the meaning of money. I was inspired to write this paper in 2018 when I witnessed in real time a debate on Twitter between Nick Szabo and anthropologist David Graeber. The debate was about money. What is it? It was provoked actually by a statement from Michael Casey, a well-known journalist, editor at CoinDesk today. He quote tweeted Vitalik Buterin and said, "You crypto gold bugs need to pay attention to what Vitalik is saying." Money was, it was a medium of account and a medium of exchange long before it was ever a store of value. And Nick Szabo responded to that saying, well, we actually have extensive historical and ethnographic evidence of money functioning as a store of value before, the existence of ledgers. So this prompted someone to ask Szabo, what do you make of David Graeber's theory of money as debt? And he responded, well, I think Graeber is operating from a very narrow definition of money. Well, this made David Graeber really mad, so he jumped in and started arguing with Szabo, and then the debate, sucked in a bunch of other people. And I was kind of watching this happen and thinking, it seems like there's no consensus on what money is among anthropologists. And David Graeber is a very prominent anthropologist. He is a popularizer of anthropological ideas. And so for many people, he's going to be the only anthropologist that they ever read. And they're going to think, what Graeber says is what anthropologists have conclusively found. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity for me as an anthropologist who takes a different view to put some of my thinking on the record so that it's not just David Graeber, period, end of story. Much respect as I have for David Graeber. So what is it that I'm proposing? in the first part of the paper, I actually read Graeber very closely to understand what his theory of money is. And he elaborates it most clearly in his book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years. That's sort of his statement on what he considers money to be. And indeed, a close reading of Debt suggests that for David Graeber, money is basically a unit of account. And that is actually a quite narrow definition of money. Most economists at this point, and even many anthropologists, would agree that money is a unit of account, but it's also a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a means of payment. Sometimes that's the term that's used. So Graeber's definition of money was in fact rather narrow, but it's more than that. He also directly recapitulates the credit state theory of money. So the fact that money is at the end of the day a creature of law, and the state, which declares what the law is therefore the creator of money. And so you can see this throughout his argument, where he says, the first true monies were issued by axial age states to finance war-making expeditions of imperial expansion, to pay their soldiers in commodity money stamped with the face of the sovereign. And he acknowledges that commodity money is actually very useful in situations of low trust, because if you don't have any reason to keep relating with someone beyond the transaction, transacting in a self-settling medium of exchange, i.e. commodity money, actually makes a lot of sense. But he makes a confusing statement at one point in his book where he says that a gold coin is effectively an IOU. And I was like, what does that mean? Oh, well, he's defining all money essentially as debt, even commodity money. And so I began to, think about this and decided that there was an opportunity to define money as both credit or debt and commodity. That in fact, it's not necessary to choose one or the other. These are two different social technologies that solve different problems. And we're confused sometimes, particularly in English, because we use the same word, money, to refer to both things. But in fact, that hasn't always been the case. In the medieval tradition, for example, there was a distinction between money as a unit of account that was enshrined in the law. In fact, that was what you could take someone to court over to determine whether a debt had been legally settled, and the actual silver or gold or other commodity medium of exchange, the token that was circulating in the economy. And so like in French, for example, there's a distinction between l'argent and monnaie. But in English, they're the same word. So what is this thing, this phenomenon? Money is a social institution. This is something that our colleague Nick Szabo was saying earlier today, and a social technology. I'm following, in my definition of institution, economist Douglas North, who was one of the pioneers of the new institutionalist economics, along with Ronald Coase and others. He defines an institution as the humanly devised constraint that structures political, economic, and social interaction. So these are both informal constraints, like norms, customs, traditions, taboos, and formal rules, laws, rights, things that are written down that are enforceable in a court of law, for example. Social institutions they arise in order to coordinate human action. So the constraint element of an institution is the coordination element. Of all the possible things that you could do, you constrain yourself following institutions in order to achieve a certain outcome with other human beings. So in this sense, because they're purposeful, because institutions solve for something, they can also be considered social technologies. Money's purpose is to facilitate exchange. Now, how does it do that? Karl Menger famously elaborated this notion of the most saleable good. Money facilitates exchange because there's a very high probability that someone wants money. In other words, there is a very high and stable level of demand for money as a good. So, it's solving the problem of the double coincidence of wants that economists talk about. I have a bunch of apples. My counterparty has a bunch of oranges. I want some of their oranges, but they don't want any of my apples. So how am I going to trade with them? How am I going to get my oranges? Well, money becomes this intermediary that facilitates that exchange. And then, of course, Mr. von Mises reiterates this argument, calls it the most marketable good. So this is a very bottom-up account of the origin of money. Even though these folks elaborated it in most detail, you can trace this all the way back to Aristotle, where he suggests that money is that commodity whose price fluctuates less than other commodities, and therefore it is a more stable barometer of value than other commodities. But as I'm suggesting here, credit money is also a social technology. Most transactions throughout human history have occurred on credit. What this means is that there is a kind of informal agreement. I do something for you. At some point in the future, you'll do something for me. This is the basis of social reciprocity. Most of this type of exchange, it's not measured. There's no strict ledger that's kept where you're saying, you bought me dinner, twice at exactly this dollar value, so that's going to be converted to a favor of exactly equal value on this date. That there is a kind of mutual agreement that, on the whole, our ledgers balance out, and that is social mutuality. However, there are situations in which you actually do need to be very specific about what debt is owed, how much is owed, how it's going to be denominated. And so there are two different types of money that you can use to denominate that. One is you can have an abstract measure of value and say, something equivalent to this. You owe me something equivalent to this. Or you can denominate it much more precisely in terms of a specific commodity and a specific amount of that commodity. So you can obviously monetize credit, you can monetize commodities, you can create chains of IOUs based on these, so they can circulate as money on various layers. This is a process Nick Bhatia has described in layered money really well. But at the end of the day, whether it's credit money or commodity money depends on where the buck stops, literally. So what is the standard underlying this chain of IOUs? So we can think of credit money as the mode of ultimate redemption is flexible. It can be any unit of value. Whereas commodity money, the mode of ultimate redemption is inflexible. It's a specific commodity standard. So these are just some examples. Here on the left, this is one of the earliest Sumerian ledgers. This is actually proto-writing. It's not even yet the full alphabet, but it's denominating accounts. And then here on the right, these are the first standardized collectibles that we have archaeological record of. So these are Aterian shell beads from the Paleolithic era found in Bismoon Cave in Morocco, and they date to approximately 142,000 BCE. So that's very ancient commodity money, and you can see that this significantly preceded the earliest historical examples we have of written ledgers. So people were using commodity money long before they had written ledgers and writing. This is just a couple of examples of credit money and commodity money that are more modern. So here on the left, this is actually from a village in Switzerland, from Saas-Fee. This is a ledger that from the year 1843 that was used to document people's chores in the village. So people would write down tasks that they performed around the village to take care of each other. And if it had been a while since you entered something in the ledger, the expectation was it's your turn now. Whereas, this is a wonderful example that Lynn Alden actually pulls out in her book, Broken Money, of the Stone of Jordan in Diablo 2. This was a video game, extremely popular, and it had both like state-issued money and this emergent commodity money. So the game designers, they built the game so that gold would be used as money, but people, game users, quickly discovered that gold wasn't actually very useful. Like you couldn't buy a lot of stuff with it, and so they turned to this scarce commodity that was nevertheless fungible, repeatable, and valuable, and they began using that as the in-game money. And then that continued until someone figured out a way to hack the game and just infinitely replicate the Stones of Jordan, at which point they lost all value and they had to move to a different form of money. But this is a really important, again, social experiment that illustrates how value is created and standardized in commodities. So this is anthropologist Paul Bohannon. He developed a theory of spheres of exchange based on his work with the Tiv people of Nigeria in the mid-20th century. This was an economy that was in the process of transitioning from older forms of money to newer, more modern forms of money. And what he realized is that commodity money tends to be used to trade with foreigners, so people you don't know well, and for prestige transactions. So things like purchasing land, getting political office, getting married. Marriage was actually the main use case for commodity money. And it functioned as a kind of more like collateral on a contract for ongoing services than as a purchase. The realm of purchase was this everyday sphere, going to the market, getting, food, ingredients for dinner, ordinary supplies, everyday tools. And most of these transactions were either conducted on credit or with very low value and not scarce commodity monies. So these spheres of exchange, you can see, are also morally valued. So from a low valuation to a high valuation. And one of the things that happened as general purpose money was introduced, so colonial money, is that these spheres collapsed into each other. So suddenly there was a form of money that you could use both for everyday stuff, like buying a chicken, and for getting a wife. And this made the people very uncomfortable because it felt like we were reducing the social institution of marriage to just another transaction. But paradoxically, this same collapse of these spheres of exchange also had an emancipatory effect on the people, because these previously marriage exchanges had been entirely brokered by older men, patriarchs, of a family system, of a family unit. And these men would form agreements between each other to swap girls between families. And that was the exchange, girl for girl, bride for bride. And this system disempowered not only the girls who were exchanged, but also the young men in the community who didn't have the freedom to choose their own partners in life. And they couldn't get married when they wanted. They could only get married when older men in the society decided to give them a wife. So the introduction of general purpose money created this moral crisis in the society, where on the one hand, it seems like marriage has now become more transactional, but on the other, we're disempowering the elder authorities that previously controlled our decision-making, and we all have more freedom to decide our own future. So, this is an example of money as a technology upending other social institutions that before had served a certain purpose. Well, now we have this new technology that does that much better. And we may not like it, but it's kind of here to stay. So anthropologist Marcel Mauss wrote about this in the context of Western economies, and he said, in Europe, one of the effects of this was that because general purpose money sort of permeated everything, all economic transacting, we developed this prestige sphere of the free gift, of no money being used. So in effect, we have this belief that we can give gifts in this purely selfless, altruistic manner where nothing is expected in return of the people we're giving the gift to, and that is our most prestigious form of transacting. So we've, in effect, said, economy is money, prestige is everything else. So these are just some examples of how money changes as a social technology changes society. I realize I'm pretty close to time, so I'm going to go quickly through the rest of these slides. This is just to give you a foretaste of some of the debates about money that the paper touches on. So there's a huge debate about whether money is a creature of the state or a creature of law versus a bottom-up emergent phenomenon. And this has been the main source of division between the Chartist and the Medalist school, or the Keynesian school of economics, the Austrian school of economics. This is a big debate. Keynes expressly goes with the state theory of money. Hayek, Mises, Menger, of course, they see it as a bottom-up phenomenon. And one of the conceptual distinctions that I think helps clarify how money can in fact be both. You can have top-down money, but you also always have bottom-up money. Why? In part because there is this fundamental distinction between payment and settlement. So I may pay you, but that doesn't mean that you have to accept my payment as settling my debt to you. So settlement is actually a psychological process by which the creditor determines that the debt to them has been paid, and they wipe the debt from their psychological ledger. Now, this is not the point of view of most institutions. The Bank for International Settlements defines settlement as a legally defined moment. So it's saying settlement is whatever the law says settlement is. Well, that holds up to the extent that the law holds up. And I'm going to leave you with this example because it's a really wonderful one. There's a court case from 1605 called the Case of Mixed Moneys, in which two Irish merchants contracted for a payment. One of them lent the other £100 and stipulated that on this date, the debt must be paid back in full, £100. Well, between the time they contracted and the time of that settlement, Queen Elizabeth I had decided to debase the currency. There was a rebellion in Ireland that she wanted to put down, and so she devalued the money as a sovereign. So the debtor came back, paid £100, and said, "We're done here." And the creditor said, "Absolutely not. This is not worth the full value of your debt to me." Took him to court, and the court ruled in favor of the debtor. Why? Because the law can't actually decide. It does not have the power to decide on value, on how much money is worth. You can try as a sovereign to declare the purchasing power of money, but you don't ultimately have control over that. And so money can only be a creature of law to the extent that the law has the power to do what it can do. And that is, it can legally determine that a debt is settled, but debt has a moral dimension that exceeds the law. So an obligation may be settled in legal terms, but not in the psychological ledger of the creditor. And so we have institutions like the vendetta, the blood feud, and war that are examples of when the law fails to enforce final settlement. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you very much.